We had planned this vacation to Sicily months ago, and it seemed like the perfect escape from the routine of daily life. Emily was thrilled about her upcoming birthday, and I wanted to make sure it was special. As we boarded the plane, surrounded by a few close friends, the energy was light and excited. Emily, 27 years old, beamed with youthful joy, while I, at 50, found myself marveling at her enthusiasm for life. She had a way of making everything seem brighter. Once we arrived in Sicily, we checked into a charming local hotel with picturesque views of the Mediterranean. That first night, we celebrated Emily's birthday in style. The hotel staff helped me organize a small party in our suite, where we popped open a bottle of champagne. The group sang "Happy Birthday" as the sun set over the sea, casting a golden glow over everything. It was a perfect moment, one that I wished could last forever. The next morning, something shifted. I woke up early, feeling a strange tension in the air that I couldn't quite place. Emily was still asleep, her head resting peacefully on the pillow, but I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest. Maybe it was nothing, just the result of too much champagne the night before, I told myself. But as I wandered through the quiet hotel hallways, the feeling only grew stronger. Later that day, our friends had planned a trip to a nearby vineyard for some wine tasting. Emily seemed a bit off, though. She was quiet during breakfast, her usual bubbly self replaced with a distant gaze. I asked her if everything was all right, and she smiled weakly, saying she was just tired. I didn't push her, I figured the excitement of the past few days had worn her out. At the vineyard, everyone else seemed to be having a great time. Glasses of wine flowed freely, and the conversation was light-hearted. But I couldn't focus. Emily was still acting strange, excusing herself to step away a couple of times to take what she claimed were phone calls from work. I trusted her, of course, but something about her demeanor bothered me. It wasn't like her to seem so distracted, especially during a trip she had been so excited about. That night, back at the hotel, the tension between us felt palpable. I wanted to ask her what was going on, but every time I worked up the courage, something stopped me. Maybe I was afraid of the answer. Maybe I didn't want to spoil the vacation with an argument. So, I let it go, for the moment. The following day, everything came to a head. Emily had gone for a walk along the beach while I stayed back at the hotel, catching up on some reading. After about an hour, I decided to go find her. I wandered down to the beach, expecting to see her sitting on the sand, but she was nowhere to be found. I kept walking, searching for any sign of her, when I finally spotted her near a small cafe, sitting at a table with someone else, a man I didn't recognize. From a distance, I could see them talking closely, Emily's body language relaxed and familiar in a way that sent a jolt of unease through me. My mind raced as I stood there, watching them for a moment too long. I had to know what was going on. When I approached the table, Emily's eyes widened in surprise. The man looked equally caught off guard. He was younger than me, probably closer to Emily's age, and as I got closer, I could see the flicker of guilt in her expression. "Jack," she started, standing up quickly, but the damage was done. My heart was already pounding in my chest, and all I could think was, what is happening? The man muttered something about leaving, and before I could say a word, he was gone. Emily stood there, her hands wringing together nervously. "Jack, it's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling slightly. But it didn't matter what she said. In that moment, everything I had felt over the past few days, hell, maybe even the past few months, made sense. The late nights, the distracted looks, the phone calls she had stepped away to take. I had ignored the signs for too long, and now it was staring me in the face. "What the hell is going on, Emily?" I finally demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. She flinched at my tone but didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at the sand, her bare toes digging nervously into the ground. "It was nothing," she whispered after a long pause. "Just someone I met through work. He happened to be here, and we just talked." "Talked?" I repeated, not believing a word of it. "That didn't look like just talking, Emily." Her eyes flickered with guilt, and I could see the tears welling up. But I wasn't ready for her tears, not yet. Not when everything felt like it was unraveling before my eyes. "Jack, please," she said, reaching out to touch my arm. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I love you." Those words only made it worse. How could she say that when she had clearly crossed a line? Even if nothing had physically happened, the emotional betrayal was enough to leave a gaping hole in my chest. As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt a wave of emotions hit me all at once: anger, confusion, sadness, and, more than anything else, fear. Fear that I was losing Emily, the woman I had fallen so deeply in love with, the woman who had brought so much light and energy into my life. I could feel my heart racing, pounding in my chest as I struggled to keep my voice steady. Standing there on the beach, with the warm Sicilian sun beating down on us, all I could think about was how I had seen this coming, yet I had done nothing to stop it. I had been blind, or maybe just willfully ignorant, of the growing distance between us. The signs had been there, the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way she had started pulling away from me bit by bit. But the truth was, I had always known, deep down, that Emily was much younger than me, that she might eventually want more than I could give her. At 50 years old, I wasn't the man I used to be. I didn't have the same energy or youthful spark that had drawn her to me in the first place. When we met, I felt lucky that someone so young, vibrant, and full of life had chosen me. I tried to keep up with her, to be everything she needed, but as time passed, it became harder. I knew she craved new experiences, excitement, things that I couldn't always offer her. And now, standing in front of her, seeing the guilt in her eyes and the tears welling up, I couldn't help but feel like this was my fault. I had let her slip away, and maybe it was because I wasn't enough for her anymore. "Emily," I said, my voice cracking with the weight of everything I was feeling. "I need you to be honest with me. Is there something more? Is this about me? About us?" She shook her head, but the hesitation in her eyes told me all I needed to know. "Jack, it's not about you. It's not like that. I don't know." Her voice trailed off, and she looked down at the sand, avoiding my gaze. I felt a lump form in my throat, and I struggled to find the right words. "I know I'm older than you," I finally said, my voice quiet but filled with the pain I was trying so hard to keep in check. "I know that maybe I can't give you the things someone younger can. But I thought we were happy. I trailed off, not knowing how to finish the sentence. The truth was, I didn't know what I thought anymore. Everything felt like it was slipping through my fingers, and I didn't know how to stop it. Emily looked up at me, her eyes filled with sadness. "Jack, you've given me everything. You've always been there for me. But, sometimes, I feel like I'm missing something. Like I need more." There it was, the thing I had been dreading for so long. The unspoken truth that had been hovering between us for months, maybe even years. She wanted more. More than I could give her. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked the question I was most afraid to hear the answer to. "Do you still love me, Emily? Or, do you want something else? Someone else?" Her eyes filled with tears again, and she took a shaky breath. "I love you, Jack. I do. But I don't know if love is enough anymore. I feel like I'm suffocating, like I need to experience life in a different way. I need to feel alive." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I had to turn away for a moment to collect myself. This was worse than anything I could have imagined. It wasn't just about the guy I saw her with earlier. This was deeper. This was about me, about us, and about how I had failed to keep the excitement alive in our relationship. I wanted to fight for her, to tell her that we could fix this, that we could work through whatever she was feeling. But how could I compete with something I couldn't even understand? She was 27, full of life and energy, and I was 50, feeling the weight of my age more and more every day. I couldn't give her the wild, carefree experiences she seemed to crave. I couldn't change the fact that I was getting older, that my body didn't move the way it used to, that I didn't have the same youthful excitement for life. "I'm scared, Emily," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm scared that I'm going to lose you, that I'm not enough for you anymore. I love you more than anything, but I don't know how to make you happy." For a long moment, there was silence between us, the only sound the soft crashing of the waves on the shore. Emily wiped away her tears, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "I don't know what I want, Jack. I'm confused. I don't want to hurt you, but I also don't want to lose myself." Her words echoed in my mind as I stood there, feeling a mixture of heartbreak and helplessness. I didn't know what to say. How could I convince her to stay when she didn't even know if she wanted to? How could I compete with the life she was searching for, a life I couldn't be a part of? "I don't want to lose you," I said quietly, looking at her with a desperation I hadn't felt in years. "But if you're not happy, I don't know what to do." Emily looked at me with tears in her eyes, and for the first time, I realized that maybe she was just as scared as I was. Scared of losing what we had, scared of what the future held, and scared of the choices she had to make. We stood there, both of us caught in a moment of uncertainty, unsure of what the next step would be. The words felt heavy in my throat, but I knew what I had to say. I loved Emily, but I couldn't hold her back. She was young, full of life, and maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the one who could give her the happiness she deserved. It tore at my heart, but deep down, I knew this wasn't about me trying to keep her. It was about letting her find what she needed, even if it meant losing her in the process. I took a deep breath and turned to face her, my voice softer than it had been moments ago. "Emily," I said, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice, I think maybe you need to figure out what you really want." She looked at me, confused, a mixture of sadness and uncertainty in her eyes. "Jack, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," I continued, the words tumbling out before I could stop them, "that maybe you should try being with him. This man, whoever he is, maybe he can give you what you're looking for, what I can't. You're still so young, Emily. You have your whole life ahead of you, and I don't want to stand in your way. I love you too much to trap you in something that doesn't make you happy." Her face paled, her lips parting as if she wanted to protest, but no words came out. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She didn't want to hurt me, but I could also sense the relief that came with the idea of exploring something new, something different. I swallowed hard, my heart aching with every word. "I'll be here for you," I told her, trying to sound stronger than I felt. "If you want to see where things go with him, then do it. See if he's the one who can make you happy. But know this, I'll still be here. If you decide you still want me, if you realize that I'm the one you want to be with, I'll be waiting." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head slowly, her voice breaking as she spoke. "Jack, I don't know what to say. I never wanted to hurt you. You've been everything to me." "I know you didn't mean to," I said gently, stepping closer to her. "And I don't blame you for any of this. But I can see it in your eyes, Emily, you're searching for something that I can't give you. And if this man, if he can offer you that, then I won't stand in your way." Her lip quivered, and she wiped at the tears that had started to fall. "But what if I'm wrong?" she whispered. "What if I leave you, and it's the worst mistake I've ever made?" I smiled sadly and cupped her face in my hands, my thumbs gently brushing away the tears on her cheeks. "Then you come back to me," I said softly. "If you realize that I'm the one you want, I'll be here, waiting for you. Always." Emily closed her eyes, leaning into my touch for what felt like the last time. I could feel her trembling, her body torn between the love we had shared and the unknown that lay ahead of her. And though every fiber of my being wanted to hold on to her, to tell her to stay, I knew this was the right thing to do. I loved her too much to keep her trapped in a life that might not be enough for her. She pulled away from me, her hands still clutching mine. "I don't deserve you, Jack," she whispered. "You've always been so good to me, and I've been selfish." "No, Emily," I said, shaking my head. "You're just human. We both are. And sometimes, love isn't enough to keep things the way they were. People change, and it's okay. We stood there for a long moment, the weight of our words hanging between us. I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of losing me, the fear of the unknown, but there was also a flicker of something else, something she hadn't shown in a long time: hope. Hope for whatever new possibilities lay ahead. I don't know if this man will make you happy, I continued, my voice steady now. But I do know that you need to find out. You owe it to yourself, Emily. And if he does, if he gives you what I can't, then I'll be happy for you. She bit her lip, nodding slowly as she tried to gather her thoughts. But what about you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How can you just let me go like this? I let out a deep sigh, the sadness creeping back into my chest. Because I love you, I said simply. And loving you means wanting you to be happy, even if it's not with me. Emily's tears flowed freely now, and she wrapped her arms around me, burying her face in my chest. I held her tightly, my heart breaking with every second that passed, but I knew this was what had to happen. I had to let her go, even though it hurt more than I could ever put into words. When she finally pulled away, her face was red and tear-streaked, but there was a determination in her eyes that hadn't been there before. I don't know what's going to happen, Jack, she said softly, but I promise you, I'll never forget everything you've done for me. I nodded, my throat too tight to respond. Instead, I watched as she turned and slowly walked away, her figure growing smaller as she moved further down the beach. I stood there for a long time, watching her until she disappeared from sight, the weight of our parting settling heavily on my shoulders. I didn't know if she would come back to me. I didn't know if this man would give her the life she craved. But one thing was certain, I had given her the freedom to choose, and I would wait for her, as long as it took. Because love, real love, sometimes meant letting go. And that was the hardest, yet most important thing I could ever do for her. As I walked back to the hotel, the waves crashing softly in the distance, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. Emily was gone, and I didn't know if she would ever return. But I had to believe that if we were meant to be, she would find her way back to me. Until then, I would wait. The year that followed was the hardest of my life. After I let Emily go, everything felt like it fell apart. The house, once filled with her laughter and energy, became an empty shell. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of her, her favorite mug in the kitchen, the perfume she used to wear still lingering faintly in the air. I couldn't escape the memories, no matter how hard I tried. At first, I held on to hope, the hope that maybe she would come back. I told myself that she just needed time to figure things out, that eventually, she'd realize I was the one she wanted. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the silence grew unbearable. There were no calls, no texts, nothing. It was as if she had disappeared from my life completely. I tried to distract myself with work, with hobbies, but nothing filled the void. Late at night, when the loneliness crept in, I found myself reaching for the bottle. I wasn't a heavy drinker before, but now it became my way of coping, my way of dulling the pain. A glass of whiskey here, a cigarette there, it started small, but before long, I found myself sinking deeper into habits I thought I had long left behind. Each night was the same, sitting alone on the porch, cigarette in one hand, a drink in the other, watching the world go by as I tried to make sense of the mess my life had become. I wasn't proud of it, but I didn't know how else to handle the crushing weight of losing her. The future I had imagined with Emily had vanished, and I was left trying to pick up the pieces. I hadn't heard from her in almost a year when, by some twist of fate, we ran into each other. It was a cold afternoon, the kind where the sky was gray and the air was sharp. I was walking down the street, my hands stuffed into my pockets, heading to the coffee shop where I spent most of my afternoons now, trying to escape the quiet of my empty house. As I pushed open the door, the familiar scent of coffee and baked goods hit me, a small comfort in the chaos that had become my life. I walked up to the counter, ordered my usual black coffee, and took a seat by the window. I had just taken my first sip when I heard her voice, a voice I hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime. Jack? I froze, the cup halfway to my lips. It couldn't be. Slowly, I turned around, and there she was. Emily. She stood a few feet away, clutching a to-go cup, her eyes wide with surprise. She looked different, older, maybe, or just more settled. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, and she wore a simple jacket, but she still had that same youthful energy about her, even if it was more subdued now. Emily, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. My heart was racing, and I didn't know if it was from shock, excitement, or fear. I hadn't expected to see her again, and now that she was standing right in front of me, I didn't know what to say. She smiled awkwardly, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. It's been a while, she said, her voice soft, unsure. Yeah, it has, I replied, setting my cup down on the table. I gestured to the seat across from me. Do you want to sit? She hesitated for a moment, then nodded and slid into the chair across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence between us heavy with everything that had happened. I didn't know if I should ask how she had been, if I should bring up the past, or if I should just pretend like none of it mattered. How have you been? She asked, breaking the silence first. I shrugged, trying to keep it casual, even though my mind was spinning. I've been, all right. You? She looked down at her cup, tracing the rim with her finger. I've been okay. Things have been different. She glanced up at me, her expression softening. I didn't expect to run into you. Neither did I admitted. Seeing her again, after all this time, brought everything rushing back, the pain, the love, the hope I had held onto for so long. But I didn't know what she was thinking, didn't know if she had missed me the way I had missed her. We sat there for a while, talking about small things, how life had been, what we had been up to. She told me about her new job, how she had moved into a new apartment, and how she had spent the past year trying to figure things out. I listened, nodding along, but inside, all I could think about was the question that had haunted me for the past 12 months. Did you find what you were looking for? I asked, cutting through the small talk. My voice was quiet, but the weight of the question hung heavy between us. Emily looked down at her coffee, her expression thoughtful. I don't know, she said after a long pause. I thought I would. I thought that maybe I just needed something new. But it wasn't what I expected. I watched her carefully, my heart pounding in my chest. And him? I asked, the question I had been dreading for so long finally spilling out. She sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. It didn't work out, she admitted. We tried, but it wasn't right. I thought maybe he was what I needed, but it turns out I was wrong. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, a mixture of relief and sadness swirling inside me. I had spent so long imagining her with someone else, wondering if she had found happiness without me. And now, to hear that it hadn't worked. I didn't know how to feel. I'm sorry, I said, even though I wasn't sure why I was apologizing. Emily shook her head, offering me a sad smile. Don't be. It wasn't your fault, Jack. I made my choices. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was filled with all the things we hadn't said, all the unresolved emotions that lingered from our last conversation. I wanted to ask her if she had thought about me, if she had missed me as much as I had missed her. But I didn't. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes soft but filled with a quiet strength. Jack, I've thought about you a lot. About us. And I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I swallowed hard, feeling the tightness in my chest. It's okay, I said, though it wasn't really. I told you I'd wait, and I meant it. But if you're not. I mean, if you don't want to come back. She reached across the table, placing her hand on mine. The warmth of her touch sent a shock through me, and I looked up to meet her gaze. I don't know what the future holds, Jack, she said quietly. But I know I never stopped caring about you. Her words were like a balm to the wound that had been festering inside me for the past year. I didn't know what would happen next, or if we could ever go back to what we had. But in that moment, sitting across from her in that small coffee shop, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of our story. We finished our coffee in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The air between us felt different, heavier, but not in a bad way. It was as if we had acknowledged the past, the mistakes, and the pain, but neither of us knew exactly what to do next. After a few moments, I glanced at Emily. She was staring into her cup, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim. I wanted to ask her if she wanted to spend more time together, but the words felt too heavy, too complicated for the moment. "Let me walk you home," I offered, standing up and pulling my coat around me. Emily hesitated for a second, then nodded with a soft smile. "Okay." We stepped out into the chilly afternoon, the sky still overcast with a pale winter sun hanging low. The streets were quiet, and we walked side by side, our hands occasionally brushing against each other's as we moved. I wondered if she could hear the pounding of my heart in the silence between us. Part of me felt that old hope rise up again, the thought that maybe we could find our way back to each other. We were approaching her street when I saw a woman standing in the yard of a house nearby. She was gently pushing a stroller back and forth. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another mother with her baby out enjoying the crisp air. But then I realized who it was. "Isn't that your mom?" I asked, stopping in my tracks, staring at the woman who I knew well from the years Emily and I had spent together. Emily stiffened beside me, her eyes fixed on the stroller. She swallowed hard, then turned to me, her face unreadable. "Jack, there's something you should know." I frowned, my heart suddenly pounding for a different reason. The unease in her voice, the tension in her shoulders, it told me that whatever she was about to say wasn't something I had prepared myself for. "Emily?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper now. She looked at me with those wide, honest eyes, and the words seemed to spill out all at once. "Jack, I have a baby. He's mine. He's 3 months old." For a moment, the world stopped turning. I stood there, staring at her, trying to process what she had just said. A baby? Her baby? I glanced over at the stroller where her mother was still gently pushing it back and forth. My mind was racing, trying to fit this new piece of information into the Emily I had known, the Emily I had loved. I started, but the words caught in my throat. "I didn't want to shock you," Emily continued, her voice shaking slightly. "But, yes, he's my son. His name is Ethan. And he's from that relationship with him." I couldn't speak. I didn't know how to respond. All this time, I had been holding on to the hope that she might come back to me, that maybe she hadn't really found happiness with that other man. But now, here she was, telling me that she had a child with him, that her life had moved on in ways I hadn't even imagined. For a brief, terrible moment, I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me. Everything I had held onto for the past year, every fantasy of her returning, of us rebuilding our life together, suddenly seemed like a distant, impossible dream. I wasn't just dealing with losing her anymore. I was facing the reality that she had built a life, a family, with someone else. Emily looked at me, her eyes filled with guilt and concern. "Jack, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I never wanted to hurt you like this." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. Then I looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted inside me. Yes, the news was a shock. Yes, it hurt more than I could put into words. But I couldn't hate her for this. How could I? She had a baby, a beautiful new life that was a part of her now. I couldn't be angry at that. And, more than that, I couldn't be angry at her for finding happiness in the one way she had been searching for. Slowly, the weight in my chest began to lift, and something unexpected bloomed in its place: happiness. Not for the life we had lost, but for the new life she had created. A baby. She had a baby. Emily, the woman I had loved for so long, was a mother now. And as I looked over at the stroller again, the tiny bundle inside, I realized I couldn't be angry at that. In fact, I felt proud. Proud of her for being the wonderful, kind, and loving person I had always known she was. Can I meet him?" I asked softly, my voice cracking just a little. Emily's eyes widened in surprise, and then they softened with relief. "Of course, Jack," she whispered. We walked over to her mother, who smiled warmly when she saw us approach. I could tell from the way she looked at me that she knew exactly who I was. I had always gotten along with Emily's mom, and in this moment, she seemed to sense how delicate the situation was. "This is Ethan," Emily said quietly, as she gently pulled back the blanket in the stroller to reveal the tiny face beneath. And there he was. Ethan. A small, delicate baby boy, with a shock of dark hair and soft features that somehow resembled both Emily and, I assumed, his father. He was perfect. I could feel my heart swelling with emotion as I looked down at him. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at this little life that had been created in the time since I had last seen Emily. It wasn't the life I had imagined, but it was a life all the same. And it was beautiful. Emily watched me carefully, as if afraid I might break down, but instead, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I smiled, reaching out gently to touch Ethan's tiny hand. "He's beautiful, Emily," I said softly, my voice full of warmth. "You're a mother now. That's incredible." She smiled through her tears, nodding as she looked down at her son. "Thank you, Jack," she whispered. "That means so much." And in that moment, I realized that maybe things hadn't turned out the way I had hoped, but that didn't mean they couldn't still be good. Maybe Emily and I would never be what we once were, but I could still be happy for her. Happy that she had found this new chapter in her life, that she had this beautiful little boy to love. Maybe, just maybe, this was how things were meant to be. I stood there for a moment longer, taking in the sight of Emily with her baby boy, Ethan. There was so much emotion swirling inside me, relief, sadness, pride, and something I couldn't quite name. But as I watched her cradling her son, I knew that things had changed forever. The life we once had was gone, and though it hurt to accept, I knew deep down it was the right thing. Emily turned to me, her eyes filled with gratitude and perhaps a little bit of lingering sorrow for what we had lost. I took a step toward her, feeling the weight of everything we had shared over the years, and gently wrapped my arms around her. She melted into the hug, her small frame resting against me in a way that felt both familiar and distant at the same time. As I held her close, I whispered softly, "You're going to be a great mother, Emily." She looked up at me, tears shining in her eyes, and I could see the appreciation, the tenderness in her expression. For a brief moment, the weight of the past year, all the heartache and uncertainty, seemed to dissolve. It wasn't about what we had lost, but about what she had gained. I kissed her forehead gently, a gesture filled with all the love, respect, and care I still felt for her. "Take care of yourself," I said quietly, pulling away just enough to look into her eyes. She nodded, her lips trembling slightly as she fought to keep her composure. "I will, Jack. Thank you, for everything." I gave her a small smile, a sad but genuine one, and turned to leave. With one last glance at Ethan, who was now peacefully dozing in his stroller, I walked away. Each step felt heavy, but also lighter in a way. I had come to terms with it. Emily had moved on in her life, and though a part of me would always love her, I knew it was time for me to do the same. The walk home felt longer than usual, the streets quieter, the air colder. But something inside me had shifted. It wasn't just the pain of losing her that filled my heart anymore, it was the peace that came with knowing she was happy, that she had found something beautiful in this new chapter of her life. When I finally reached home, I paused for a moment at the front door, staring at the familiar surroundings. The house felt emptier than ever, but I knew it wasn't the end of my story. Just like Emily, I had my own path to walk, my own future to build. And though it would take time, I believed that one day, I too would find a way to be happy again. I stepped inside, closed the door softly behind me, and took a deep breath. I wasn't sure what came next, but for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to find out.